and political rights. The spread of what we associate with a democratic system. And of course, sadly, we're confronted with a very non-democratic system. And more, public executions. The authorities admitted in front of the Human Rights Council a while back that public executions take place. It is public admission of an illegality in international law. The prisons, collective punishment, huge prison camps, families kept there in perpetuity. Families being persecuted, prosecuted, suppressed, just because one member falls foul of the government. Suppression of all kinds of rights, freedom of information, association, religion, and more. And the violations do not only affect the locals, they affect foreigners too. Abductions from Japan, abductions from South Korea, and more. So these are international issues which pertain to illegalities of a very criminal kind internationally. Next, the question of asylum, refugees. This is by far the most sensitive part of 6 years' work. Why? Because asylum, refugees are cross-border issues and pertain to many countries. My humble approach always is to advocate humane treatment of all, whether or not you call them refugees, defectors, or whatever. And we must not forget the need to address the root causes in the country of origin. We must put equal and even more emphasis on the root causes in the country of origin. The violations that take place, that drive people out, civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights related violations, including persecution, including food deprivation, including the imposition of the need to have an exit visa for which people can be prosecuted and persecuted if they leave without an exit visa. My humble approach is to advocate that all countries should treat people humanely. Please don't classify them as illegal immigrants. If you don't want to use the word refugees, at least look at them as humanitarian cases. And I want to be fair. We also need to support asylum countries to ensure that they work well and act well as part of international solidarity. And we know for the past year plus that the outflows from DPR Korea have become more difficult. The sanctions against those seeking to leave have become more stringent. We also know that collective punishment is being used against families more, especially in regard to those who are trying to leave or have left and who are sent back sadly to the country of origin. Next, we have the situation of specific groups that are addressed in my report. Women are sadly impacted upon very negatively throughout the years, especially if they don't belong to the elite. Children, the elderly, and those with disabilities. I've interviewed scores and scores of women seeking asylum in other countries directly, as individuals and groups. About 80 or 90% of the women I've interviewed pay smugglers to leave, $3,000 or $4,000. A proportion of them also land up in forced marriage, forced prostitution, forced labor, and more. Those are the testimonies that reflect the plight of those who do not fit into the elite of the country. The children, the street children, children in institutions, and more. Triplets, 3 children born, are usually segregated from families and kept in special wards. I've heard this with my own ears from people who've been there in the wards. And we've also had information that children are forced to labor in the fields while they should be at school. NGOs present information on children being forced to work in poppy fields, and you know what poppy's about. Likewise, the disabilities angle. until a few years ago, those with disabilities were kept in special wards in prison-like conditions. And that's why you will not see those with disabilities on the streets. They have a new law in the country concerned, but they need to improve implementation in keeping with international standards, particularly, hopefully, to become a party to the new UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I would grant you also that they have sought, the authorities have sought help from outside on this to improve the situation at home. And NGOs and others should be recognized for helping well there. Elderly who don't fall into the elite suffer also from food deprivations in their life. And we've heard that war veterans recently were protesting against the lack of food and also the impact of the revaluation of the yuan. In other words, the government trying to control money through revaluating the money in the country of origin. Elderly people have been suffering from it. So that is the scenario generally. And one of the most critically worrying features very recently in that scenario is the fact that the authorities revalue the yuan. They cut off 2 zeros from 100 yuan, and they said that 100 yuan would be worth only 1 yuan. That was a means of control to suppress the market system, to push people with money to exchange their money, and to control the flow of money. People were also punished if they try to get rid of the old currency clandestinely. And due to the huge inflation and food shortages that have come about since the end of last year, we've had a rare apology from the authorities for their misstep, the botched revaluation. And I'm informed that although markets were being closed last year, they're being slightly more open this year as part of the imputed remedy for the botched revaluation. But even that is not enough, because we must get back to square one. We need a people-first policy. We need equitable distribution of resources to help the people. And we need respect for the people when they want to generate their own income, their own food, and more. Those are elements and aspects of the situation that pertain to the sad tragedy of what it is today. The state, that state, as one big prison. That state as one big prison. And that is why we must expose it well and pressure for accountability. Accountability as a final aspect, perhaps, before I come to the future. We know that misdeeds are taking place, have been taking place for so long. We know that some NGOs from the Republic of Korea have put forward cases to the International Criminal Court. We know that the UN should be more effective on this. And it is very illogical to me that to date, the total UN system has not been used yet to address these egregious violations. It is incumbent upon the total UN system to act, meaning also the Security Council and its affiliates, while I do welcome UN presences also in the DPRK, such as World Food Programme, UNICEF and others. But we must use the UN as a voice, totally as a voice, for those who don't have a voice. And interestingly, of course, it would be instructive to learn in future as to how the International Criminal Court will react, particularly the prosecutor. I know that the cases that have been referred to the prosecutor use the ground claim that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, should have jurisdiction on the basis that some of the leaders of DPR Korea are also classifiable as nationals of Republic of Korea, and therefore